Collapse at midcourt. Hank Gathers was 23 years old and the most dominant college basketball player in the country when he walked onto the floor at Gersten Pavilion in Los Angeles on March 4th, 1990. He was there to play a West Coast Conference Tournament semifinal for Loyola Marymount University. He would not walk off that floor under his own power. Gathers had arrived at Loyola Marymount as a transfer from the University of Southern California, and by his junior year, he had transformed into something the college game rarely produced. He led the entire nation in both scoring and rebounding simultaneously during the 1988 to 1989 season. That combination had been achieved by only one other player in the history of college basketball. His averages were not the product of a system that inflated statistics. Loyola Marymount ran a genuine up-tempo offense under head coach Paul Westhead, a system designed to generate as many possessions as possible, and Gathers was the engine at the center of it. He scored, he rebounded, he ran the floor. He was the reason people came to watch. Gersten Pavilion was Loyola Marymount's home arena, a modest facility by major conference standards, but a place where the Lions had developed a following built on the team's extraordinary offensive production. For the WCC tournament, the atmosphere carried additional weight. This was a postseason game with implications for the NCAA tournament. Gathers was playing in front of teammates, coaches, fans, and the broader college basketball community that had spent the season watching his numbers climb. Earlier that same season, in December of 1989, Gathers had collapsed during a game. That collapse had led to a diagnosis. According to reports, he was found to have a cardiac arrhythmia, an irregular heart rhythm abnormality known as exercise-induced ventricular tachycardia, and was prescribed a beta blocker to keep his heartbeat stable. He was placed on medication to manage the condition. According to accounts from people close to him at the time, Gathers had raised concerns about how the medication affected his performance on the court, reporting that it made him feel slower and less effective than he was accustomed to feeling. The specific details of what dosage adjustments, if any, were made to his medication in the weeks that followed remain a subject of reported dispute, and were not fully resolved in public record. What is confirmed is that Gathers returned to play after the December collapse. He continued performing at an elite level. On March 4th, 1990, he took the floor for the WCC semifinal and played the way he always played. In the first half, Gathers received a pass near the basket. He elevated, caught the ball above the rim, and finished an alley-oop dunk. The play was routine for him. He had done it hundreds of times. He landed and began jogging back toward the defensive end of the court. He did not make it. Seconds after landing from the dunk, without contact from any opposing player, Gathers fell to the court near the midcourt line. There was no collision, no stumble, no visible mechanical cause. He simply went down. He attempted to get up. According to accounts from those present at the scene, he said, I don't want to lay down. He was conscious briefly and resisting. Then he lost consciousness entirely and did not regain it. Teammates and staff reached him within seconds. The arena, which had been loud moments before, went quiet. Players from both teams stopped. Coaches came onto the floor. The crowd, which had just watched Gathers complete a dunk, now watched medical personnel run onto the court and begin CPR. Resuscitation efforts were performed on the floor of Gersten Pavilion. Paramedics arrived and continued working on him. The decision was made to transport him to Daniel Freeman Marina Hospital in the Marina del Rey area of Los Angeles. He was moved from the arena floor and taken by ambulance. At the hospital, medical staff continued their efforts. They were not able to revive him. Hank Gathers was pronounced dead on March 4th, 1990. The cause of death was hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. He was 23 years old. The footage of his collapse, the empty court, the silent arena, and the stillness of the crowd in the moments that followed remain some of the most chilling material ever captured in a college sports broadcast. Bouncer below helmet. Phillip Hughes was 25 years old and a professional cricketer for Australia when he took his position at the crease at the Sydney Cricket Ground on November 25th, 2014. He was playing in a Sheffield Shield match, Australia's premier domestic first-class cricket competition. The ball that ended his life was delivered legally, in the normal course of the game, by a bowler doing exactly what fast bowlers are trained to do. Hughes had played Test cricket for Australia and was considered an established presence in Australian batting. He had made his international debut years earlier and had navigated the pressures of competing at the highest level of the sport. By November of 2014, he was in domestic competition, playing Sheffield Shield cricket for South Australia against New South Wales at the Sydney Cricket Ground, one of the oldest and most storied venues in the sport. The ground sits in the Moore Park precinct of Sydney and has hosted cricket since the 1870s. For a Sheffield Shield match, the crowd was modest compared to international fixtures, but the players and officials present were professionals operating within the full structure of the game. The Sheffield Shield is contested between Australian state teams and serves as the primary pathway for players seeking selection to the national side. The match was standard in every observable respect. Hughes had batted before, faced bouncers before, and worn a helmet, as all batsmen do, in compliance with standard practice at every level of professional cricket. A bouncer is a delivery in which the bowler pitches the ball short of a length, causing it to rise steeply toward the batsman's head and upper body. It is a legal delivery and a standard tactical weapon used by fast bowlers at every level of the game. On November 25, 2014, New South Wales fast bowler Sean Abbott bowled a short pitch delivery to Hughes. The ball rose sharply. It made contact with Hughes just below his left ear, in the gap between the lower edge of his helmet and the protective grill that covered his face. Cricket helmets of the design in use at that time left a section of the neck and lower head exposed at that specific angle. The ball struck that unprotected area. Hughes lost his footing immediately. He collapsed forward and fell face first onto the pitch. He was unconscious when he hit the ground. He did not attempt to break his fall. Players from both sides converged on him. There was no ambiguity about the severity of what had happened. Medical personnel from the ground staff reached him and began assessment. Mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and ventilatory support were initiated on the field of play to assist his breathing. An ambulance was called and Hughes was transported to St. Vincent's Hospital in Sydney. At St. Vincent's, he was assessed and underwent emergency surgery. The injury was a subarachnoid hemorrhage caused by a ruptured vertebral artery. The impact of the ball had torn an artery in his neck, producing a massive bleed in his brain. The surgery was performed, but Hughes did not regain consciousness. He was placed on life support and remained in that condition for 2 days. His family and teammates gathered at the hospital during that period. On November 27, 2014, he was pronounced dead. He was 25 years old. The cause of death was a subarachnoid hemorrhage resulting from a ruptured vertebral artery. In direct response to his death, Cricket Australia and the sport's governing bodies mandated the redesign of cricket helmets to extend protection to the area of the neck and lower ear where the ball had made contact. The helmet that failed to protect Hughes is no longer the standard in professional cricket. Center circle collapse. Marc-Vivien Foé was 28 years old and a professional footballer for Cameroon when he collapsed in the center circle of the Stade de Gerland in Lyon, France, on June 26, 2003. He was playing in the semi-final of the FIFA Confederations Cup. No other player was near him when he fell. Foé was an experienced professional who had built his club career across several European leagues. At the time of the 2003 Confederations Cup, he was on loan at Manchester City from Olympique Lyonnais, the Lion club whose home ground was the Stade de Gerland, the very stadium where he would die. He was a central midfielder, physically imposing and technically capable, and he had been a consistent contributor to the Cameroonian national team across several years of international competition. The FIFA Confederations Cup is a tournament held in the country that will host the following year's World Cup, featuring the champions of each continental confederation alongside the World Cup host and the reigning World Cup winner. The 2003 edition was held in France. Cameroon had advanced to the semi-final stage where they faced Colombia. The match was broadcast live on international television and was watched across multiple continents. The Stade de Gerland had a capacity of around 41,000 and was well populated for a Confederations Cup semi-final involving one of Africa's most successful footballing nations. The match had reached the 72nd minute. Foé was in the center circle, in open play, not in a challenge, not in physical contact with any opposing player. The cameras were covering the flow of play. He collapsed. There was no contact, no trip, no medical event that was externally visible before the fall. Live broadcast footage captured him going down, and according to accounts from witnesses at the ground, his eyes rolled back as he fell. He made no attempt to catch himself. He landed and did not move. Players from both Cameroon and Colombia immediately recognized that this was not a standard injury. Arms went up. Players waved urgently toward the sideline. Medical personnel ran onto the pitch from the touchline. The match was halted. Resuscitation was begun on the pitch and continued for a period reported at approximately 45 minutes. During that time, medical staff worked on Foé at the center of the field and then moved him to the sideline, where efforts continued. The crowd in the stadium was largely still. Other players stood or knelt on the pitch. The full scope of what was happening was visible to everyone present in the stadium and to viewers watching the live broadcast in multiple countries. Despite the sustained resuscitation effort, Foé could not be revived. He was pronounced dead at the stadium on June 26, 2003. The cause of death was hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, specifically an enlarged left ventricle, a condition in which the heart muscle is abnormally thickened in a way that can cause it to fail without warning during physical exertion. He had not been diagnosed with the condition prior to his death. The image of his collapse, broadcast live on international television to an audience in the millions, became one of the most widely seen moments of an athlete dying in competition. 14th round. Duk Koo Kim was a South Korean boxer who traveled to Las Vegas, Nevada in November of 1982 to fight for the WBA lightweight championship of the world. His opponent was Ray Mancini, the reigning champion, a popular and aggressive fighter from Youngstown, Ohio. The fight was scheduled for 15 rounds and was broadcast on national television in the United States. Kim did not survive the night. Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas was among the most prestigious boxing venues in the world in 1982. Championship fights held on its premises drew large crowds and significant television audiences. The WBA lightweight championship fight between Mancini and Kim was a high-profile card. Mancini had cultivated a reputation as an exciting fighter, whose aggressive style and likable public persona made him a draw for casual and dedicated boxing fans alike. Kim was a challenger who had compiled a record in South Korea and was making his most significant appearance in the sport on the largest stage of his career. From the opening rounds, the fight was brutal. Kim absorbed punishment throughout the contest, but continued to press forward and engage. The fight was competitive in the way that absorbing championship fights often are, with both men landing significant blows across the early and middle rounds. Kim demonstrated the durability that had brought him to a title fight, but the accumulation of damage over 13 rounds was substantial. In the 14th round, Mancini landed a series of punches that drove Kim backward and into the ropes. Kim could no longer adequately defend himself. Referee Richard Green, who was the third man in the ring that evening, stopped the fight. Kim was standing when the bout was halted but was not in a condition to continue. What happened next occurred within minutes of the stoppage. Kim collapsed. He lost consciousness in the ring after the fight had already been stopped and was no longer in progress. He did not fall during the contest itself, but in the immediate aftermath of it, as he stood in the ring following the referee's intervention. Medical personnel entered the ring and assessed him. He was unresponsive. The decision was made to transport him by ambulance to a hospital in Las Vegas. He was diagnosed with the subdural hematoma, a bleed between the surface of the brain and the skull, caused by the forces his brain had sustained during the fight. Surgery was performed. He did not regain consciousness. Kim remained in a coma following the surgery. He died 4 days after the fight on November 17, 1982. The cause of death was the subdural hematoma sustained during the bout. He was less than 2 rounds of championship boxing away from surviving, in the sense that the fight was nearly complete when the injuries proved unsurvivable. In direct response to his death, the sport's major sanctioning bodies reduced the maximum number of rounds in championship fights from 15 to 12. That change has remained in effect across all major boxing organizations from that point forward. The 14 rounds Kim fought before collapsing are the reason no championship fight today goes beyond 12. Mountain heat amphetamines. Tommy Simpson was a professional road cyclist and the leader of the British national cycling team when he took to the roads of southern France in July of 1967 for the Tour de France. He did not finish the race. He died on the upper slopes of Mont Ventoux during the 13th stage on July 13, 1967, in full view of the thousands of spectators who lined the mountain road to watch the world's most famous bicycle race. Simpson was one of the most accomplished British cyclists of his era. He had won the World Road Race Championship in 1965 and had established himself as a credible competitor in the major European stage races at a time when British success in continental road cycling was relatively uncommon. The Tour de France was the pinnacle of the sport, and Simpson had competed in it before. In 1967, he was 29 years old and considered a serious competitor. The 13th stage of the 1967 Tour de France required riders to cross Mont Ventoux, a mountain in the Provence region of southern France that sits at an elevation of 1,912 meters above sea level. Mont Ventoux is unlike most alpine or Pyrenean climbs in one specific way. Its upper section, above the tree line, is completely exposed. There are no trees to provide shade, no vegetation to reduce the intensity of the sun, and the pale limestone surface of the upper mountain reflects heat back upward at riders as they climb. Temperatures on the upper slopes of Ventoux in summer can reach extreme levels. On July 13, 1967, conditions on the mountain were reported to be exceptionally harsh, with high heat bearing down on the field of riders from the time they began the ascent. The roads of the Tour de France at that time, particularly on major mountain stages, were lined with spectators, team vehicles, and support personnel. Mechanics followed the riders on motorcycles or in cars carrying spare equipment and providing on-road assistance. Spectators stood at the roadside, sometimes only meters from the riders, cheering them through. The atmosphere on a major Ventoux climb was dense, chaotic, and loud, with fans pressing close as the cyclists struggled past. As the riders moved up the exposed upper section of Ventoux, Simpson began to show signs of serious distress. His line across the road became erratic. He was zigzagging, unable to hold a straight course. Other riders and observers on the mountain noticed his trajectory. He was not descending, and he was not stopping deliberately. He was losing control of his body while still attempting to climb. He collapsed at the side of the road. Spectators and team mechanics who were nearby reached him. He was conscious at that moment. He reportedly said, on, though popular myth later substituted the words with the phrase, "put me back on my bike." While the famous line about his bicycle was actually a later journalistic invention, his frantic determination to keep moving was verified by the team mechanic, who briefly helped him up. He was placed back on his bicycle. He rode approximately 500 yards further up the mountain before collapsing a second time. He did not rise again. Race officials and medical personnel were summoned. Emergency responders reached him on the upper mountain and attended to him at the scene. Resuscitation was attempted. He could not be revived. He was transported from the mountain by emergency personnel. Tommy Simpson was pronounced dead on July 13, 1967. The autopsy conducted following his death revealed that he had died of heat exhaustion and dehydration, compounded by the presence of amphetamines in his system. A memorial stone marking the location of his second and final collapse on the upper slopes of Mont Ventoux was erected and remains there. Cyclists who ride Ventoux today frequently leave tokens at the memorial as they pass. Tamburello Wall. Ayrton Senna was a three-time Formula One world champion and the most celebrated racing driver of his generation when his car left the track at the Tamburello corner of the Autodromo Enzo Dino Ferrari in Imola, Italy, on May 1, 1994. He was traveling at approximately 190 miles per hour when his car struck a concrete retaining wall. He did not survive. Senna had won his 3 world championships in 1988, 1990, and 1991. By 1994, he was driving for the Williams team, widely considered one of the most competitive cars in the field. The San Marino Grand Prix was the third race of the 1994 season. It was held at Imola, a circuit in the Emilia-Romagna region of northern Italy with a layout that included several corners, taken at very high speed. The race was broadcast live internationally and was followed by an enormous global television audience. The 1994 San Marino Grand Prix weekend had already been marked by serious incidents before race day. During qualifying on Saturday, April 30th, Austrian driver Roland Ratzenberger was killed when his car left the track at high speed. It was the first driver fatality in Formula One in nearly a decade. The mood across the paddock and among the broadcast teams covering the event on Sunday was already affected by what had happened the day before. On race day, May 1st, the San Marino Grand Prix began under a safety car period following a separate incident at the start. When the safety car pulled in and racing resumed, Senna led the field. He was the fastest car on track and was controlling the race from the front. On the 7th lap, Senna's car approached the Tamburello corner. Tamburello was a high-speed left-hand curve that drivers of that era took, without lifting the throttle, meaning they carried full speed through the bend. His car ran off the racing line. It crossed the edge of the track surface and traveled across the runoff area at undiminished speed, before striking the concrete retaining wall that bordered the outer edge of the corner. The impact was severe and immediate. A fragment of the front suspension of the car was later determined, in the official investigation, to have penetrated the visor of Senna's helmet. The fragment caused fatal skull fractures. The crash was broadcast live to the millions of viewers watching the race. The television cameras captured the car leaving the track and the impact with the wall. After the car came to rest, Senna did not move. Medical vehicles and personnel stationed around the circuit responded immediately. Professor Sid Watkins, the Formula One medical delegate and a neurosurgeon who had developed a close personal friendship with Senna over the preceding years, was among the first to reach him at trackside. Watkins later stated publicly in his memoir and in interviews that he believed from the moment he reached Senna that the injuries were unsurvivable. Watkins and the medical team present at the scene performed initial assessment and began stabilization procedures. Senna was airlifted from the circuit to the Maggiore Hospital in Bologna. He arrived at the hospital and was placed on life support. The injuries he had sustained in the impact were documented in the official medical and legal proceedings that followed. He did not regain consciousness at any point after the crash. Ayrton Senna was pronounced dead on May 1st, 1994. The cause of death was skull fractures, caused by the penetration of a suspension fragment through his helmet visor during the impact at Tamburello. His death, combined with the death of Ratzenberger the previous day, triggered the most comprehensive review of safety standards in the history of Formula One. Circuit designs were altered, car construction regulations were rewritten, cockpit protection requirements were strengthened, and the overall approach to driver safety in the sport was restructured in the years that followed. The modern Formula One safety environment, which has prevented fatalities in the sport for many years since, is in significant part a product of what happened at Tamburello on May 1st, 1994. Thrown from Whistler, Nodar Kumaritashvili was 21 years old and a Luger representing Georgia when he arrived at the Whistler Sliding Center in Whistler, British Columbia, Canada, on February 12, 2010. He was there for a training run scheduled hours before the opening ceremony of the Vancouver Winter Olympics. He was killed before the games officially began. The 2010 Winter Olympics were hosted in and around Vancouver, British Columbia. The sliding events, which included luge, skeleton, and bobsled, were held at the Whistler Sliding Center, a purpose-built facility located approximately 125 kilometers north of Vancouver in the mountains north of the city. The track had been constructed for the Games and had been in use for practice and test events in the period leading up to the Olympics. In the weeks and days before the games opened, athletes and their coaches had raised observations about the speed of the Whistler track. The track's design and elevation profile generated speeds that were among the fastest recorded on any luge track in the world at that time. These observations were documented and had been noted by governing bodies and officials connected to the competition. Kumaritashvili had completed previous training runs at the facility in the days before February 12th and was familiar with the track from those sessions. Training runs on race morning before the opening ceremony were a standard part of the pre-competition schedule for sliding events. Athletes made timed practice runs to build familiarity with the course conditions on the day. Kumaritashvili was among the Lugers taking runs that morning. Other athletes and officials were present at the facility. The Olympic broadcast infrastructure was already in place and running, as coverage of pre-games activity had begun in advance of the official opening. On his final training run, Kumaritashvili traveled through the course and reached the bottom section of the track. He came out of the final curve. He was traveling at nearly 90 miles per hour. In the transition out of that curve, he lost control of his sled. The sled carried him upward along the inside wall of the track. He was ejected over the sidewall of the track at the exit of the curve. He left the track entirely and became airborne outside the structure. He struck a steel support pole that formed part of the roof structure of the track. The pole at the point of impact was not padded. The crash was captured by the Olympic broadcast cameras that were running at the facility as part of the pre-games coverage infrastructure. The footage was broadcast on Olympic feeds. Emergency personnel stationed at the Whistler Sliding Center responded immediately. Medical staff reached Kumaritashvili at the scene and assessed him. He was attended to outside the track structure where he had come to rest after striking the pole. He was transported to a medical facility. He was pronounced dead shortly after the crash. In the immediate aftermath, the Whistler Sliding Center was closed for assessment. Olympic and track officials reviewed the facility. Before competition resumed, physical modifications were made to the track, including the addition of padding to the steel support structures and adjustments to the sidewall height at the exit of the final curve where the ejection had occurred. Those modifications were completed before the luge competition began as part of the Olympic schedule. Nodar Kumaritashvili was pronounced dead on February 12th, 2010. He was 21 years old. The crash and its broadcast on Olympic coverage, hours before the games officially opened, prompted immediate examination of track safety standards at Whistler and initiated broader review of luge track design and speed management at the international level. 78-foot fall. Owen Hart was a professional wrestler performing for the WWE when he was rigged into a harness above the floor of Kemper Arena in Kansas City, Missouri on May 23, 1999. He was preparing to descend from the rafters into the ring as part of his entrance for a match at the Over the Edge pay-per-view event. He fell 78 feet and did not survive the fall. Hart was a veteran of professional wrestling, trained from a young age within the Hart family, one of the most accomplished wrestling families in the history of the sport. By 1999, he had performed for years at the highest level of the industry, competing in notable matches and feuds across his career. At the time of Over the Edge, he was performing under a character known as the Blue Blazer, a superhero-themed persona that involved theatrical costuming and an exaggerated on-screen presentation. The Over the Edge pay-per-view was a live event held at Kemper Arena in Kansas City, Missouri, before an announced attendance of more than 16,000 fans who had purchased tickets and were present in the building. Pay-per-view events of this scale in 1999 were significant commercial and production undertakings. The arenas were set up with television production infrastructure, including multiple camera positions, broadcast commentary teams, and large video screens for the live audience. The events ran for several hours and included multiple matches across the evening. Hart's planned entrance for his match that evening involved being suspended in a harness and cable system in the rafters of Kemper Arena, then being lowered from a height down toward the ring, arriving in character as the Blue Blazer in a way consistent with the theatrical presentation the character called for. This style of dramatic entrance was not an untested idea in the context of large-scale live entertainment productions. The rigging for the entrance had been set up above the arena floor as part of the event's pre-show preparation. Hart was fitted into the harness above the arena floor in the elevated structure of the building. The descent was intended to be controlled, lowered by cable from the rafters to the ring. The quick release mechanism on the harness triggered prematurely. Hart was not in position to be lowered in a controlled manner at the moment the mechanism released. He fell. He fell 78 feet. He landed chest first on the top rope of the wrestling ring below. Most people inside Kemper Arena did not realize what was happening at the moment of the accident. More than 16,000 fans were in the building. The arena lights were turned down in the building while the promotional video played, leaving the crowd completely in the dark. At the moment of the fall, the WWE's television production was airing a pre-recorded video package as part of the broadcast, and the pay-per-view audience watching at home did not see the fall itself. The live crowd in Kemper Arena had no such buffer. They did not see the descent or the impact clearly, only realizing something had gone terribly wrong when the house lights came back up and medical personnel rushed down. Ring personnel and emergency medical staff responded immediately. Hart was attended to in the ring by those who reached him first. Paramedics arrived at the ringside area and assessed his injuries. The injuries were severe. The decision was made to transport him by ambulance to Truman Medical Center in Kansas City. While medical personnel worked on Hart in the arena and while the ambulance transport was underway, the pay-per-view broadcast of Over the Edge continued. Matches proceeded. Commentary continued. The decision to keep the event running while the situation involving Hart was still unresolved generated significant public controversy in the days and weeks that followed. The live audience in the arena was aware of what had happened. The television audience largely was not until the information became public. At Truman Medical Center, medical staff received Hart and continued efforts to treat the injuries he had sustained in the fall. Those efforts could not succeed. Owen Hart was pronounced dead on May 23, 1999. The cause of death was internal injuries sustained when he struck the top rope of the wrestling ring after falling 78 feet from the rafters of Kemper Arena. He was 34 years old. His wife, Martha Hart, subsequently pursued legal action against the WWE in connection with his death. The case was settled out of court. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.